The night began with a silence that felt heavier than sound. Reporters were waiting outside a hotel in Los Angeles, expecting Sandra Bullock to appear for a scheduled interview, but she never walked out of the main door. Cameras kept flashing at the entrance, yet no one noticed the quiet exit from the back hallway, where a black car pulled away without noise or attention. Inside that car, Sandra was leaning against the window, trying to stay conscious, her fingers pressed against her arm as if she were trying to hide pain that she did not want the world to see. No announcement was made. No statement was released. Within an hour, she was already inside a private hospital room, without makeup, without lights, without cameras. Even the doctors were told not to mention her name. The nurse simply wrote SB on the chart. Nobody was allowed to know why she had been brought in. The world only knew she had vanished, and whenever a famous person disappears, people begin to imagine the worst. Online theories grew faster than truth. Some said she was exhausted. Some claimed she was hiding from the media. One rumor even said she was having a secret mental breakdown. But the truth was not chaos, not scandal, not selfishness. It was something much quieter, something that would not fit inside headlines. Inside the room, Sandra lay on the bed with an oxygen tube resting just below her nose. Her eyes were open, but they carried a tired heaviness, the kind of weight that does not come from weakness, but from choosing to do something that hurts for the sake of someone else. She asked the nurse a simple question in a soft voice. "Please do not let anyone know I am here." The nurse nodded. She had worked in hospitals long enough to understand that real pain never needs an audience. Hours passed. Outside, the news cycle kept spinning. Fans wanted an explanation. The media wanted a story. Hollywood wanted clarity. But the truth was already moving in a different direction, away from cameras, toward a moment that had nothing to do with fame. Just after midnight, the hospital doors opened again. This time, there were no reporters, no crowd, no spotlight. A man entered quietly, wearing a simple dark jacket and holding a small visitor pass that he signed himself. The security guard looked at the paper, then looked at the man's face and stopped breathing for a second. He recognized him instantly, but the man gave a gentle signal with his hand as if saying, "Please, no attention." He signed the register with two simple words, K. Reeves Keanu. Reeves did not ask for special permission. He did not demand privacy. He did not bring a manager, a spokesperson, or a camera crew. He walked with the kind of silence that only a person who respects pain can carry. Every step he took was slow, steady, and filled with purpose. Before entering Sandra's room, he paused outside the door, breathing in, as if preparing himself for something too personal to be spoken out loud. When he walked in, Sandra was awake. She turned her head slowly and saw him standing there. She did not smile at first. She just studied his face, like she needed a second to believe he was actually there. He moved closer, pulled the chair near her bed, and sat in silence. The silence did not feel empty. It felt safe, like the kind of silence that only exists between two people who do not need to prove anything to each other. "You came," Sandra whispered, her voice tired but steady. Keanu nodded. "You did not have to go through this alone. No questions, no judgment, no emotional pressure, just presence, just humanity." The nurse entered quietly to check the machines, but Keanu stood up and said gently, "It is fine. I will stay with her." The nurse understood immediately. The presence of someone who truly cares is sometimes stronger than any medicine. As minutes turned into an hour, Sandra finally exhaled and closed her eyes for the first time that night, as if her body only allowed itself to rest after Keanu arrived. He did not speak much. He simply stayed. Not like a guest, not like a celebrity, but like someone who remembered something that could not be explained in interviews or red carpet answers. At one moment, Sandra opened her eyes again and said softly, "Keanu, do you remember the night I met you outside that old hospital years ago?" He looked at her with a gentle kind of focus. "I remember every second. I did not even know who you were," she said. "I just saw someone sitting alone." Keanu smiled slightly. "I was not famous back then. I was just a kid waiting for something I could not change." Sandra nodded. "You looked lost." "I was," he said quietly. The conversation stopped there, but the meaning did not. There was a past between them that no one had ever heard, a moment buried in time that held more value than any award, any premiere, any film contract, to the world. All they ever were was co-stars, friends, Hollywood names that worked together. But there was a truth that no one knew. Sandra once helped Keanu without knowing his name, and he never forgot. And now, years later, when she was the one lying in a hospital bed with pain that the world could not see, he came not because she was famous, not because she needed attention, but because something inside him still remembered the night she sat beside him on a cold hospital bench and said one sentence that changed his life. You do not need fame to be kind. You just need a reason. Keanu never forgot those words. And tonight, in this quiet hospital room, he was proving them true. Outside, the world kept guessing. Inside, the truth was already happening. Not in headlines, not in gossip, but in a silent act of respect that would one day become a reveal no one would expect. And in that silence, Sandra finally closed her eyes again, not because she was weak, but because for the first time since she got there, she felt safe enough to rest. The next morning arrived without noise, without headlines, without the normal chaos that follows a celebrity name. The hospital hallway was still quiet, as if it could sense that something deeply human was happening behind that closed door. The world outside was still guessing where Sandra Bullock had gone. But inside that room, the truth was unfolding in a calm way. The kind of truth that refuses attention because it was born from kindness, not publicity. Keanu had stayed the whole night. He did not sleep, but he did not look tired either. He sat on the same chair, watching over Sandra the way someone watches over a friend they do not want to lose. Every time a nurse walked in, she found him in the same position, quiet but present, like a guard made of patience instead of force. Sandra opened her eyes slowly. The first thing she saw was not the ceiling, not the machines, not the window. She saw Keanu still there, still steady, still silent, and something inside her eased the way pain eases when someone finally understands it. "You did not leave?" she whispered. Keanu shook his head. "I said I would stay." She tried to sit up, but the nurse gently stopped her. Her arm was still weak, the one she had used to donate bone marrow. The pain was not sharp anymore, but it was deep, the kind of pain that reminds you your body has done. Something difficult for someone else. You should not have come all the way. "Here for me?" Sandra said softly. Keanu looked at her, with an expression that held truth in it. "I did not come for you because you are Sandra Bullock. I came because years ago you came for someone who was just a stranger." Her eyes lowered, as if she was searching her own memory. "You still remember that night?" she said. "I remember everything," Keanu replied. The story of that night had never been shared in interviews. It was not written in magazines. It had no pictures, no trending posts, no viral videos. It took place long before the world cared about either of them, back when fame was not part of their lives, when no one watched every step they took. Keanu was barely in his 20s. He had been sitting outside an old hospital, alone, waiting for news about someone he cared for. He had no money left for food. He had not slept for 2 nights. He was just a young man with quiet eyes and a silent storm inside him. And then she came. Sandra was not famous yet. She was just another struggling actress trying to survive Hollywood, walking home after a small acting class. She saw him sitting there, shoulders bent, face tired, hands shaking as if his thoughts were heavier than his body. She did not know his name. He did not know hers. She just felt something human, something familiar, something that said, "This person needs someone to sit beside him before the world eats him alive." So she sat. No cameras, no purpose, no reward. "Are you waiting for someone?" she had asked. Keanu nodded, too tired to explain. "Whoever it is," she said softly, "I hope they stay, and I hope you stay strong with them." He did not reply at first. But that night, she offered him half of the sandwich she had saved for herself. She said 5 simple words before she left. "You do not need fame to be kind." Keanu had never forgotten those words. They stayed with him longer than pain. They stayed through every success, every tragedy, every quiet, lonely night. They stayed even when the world stopped being gentle, and now, years later when the roles had reversed, When Sandra was the one lying in a hospital bed with no announcement, no spotlight, no applause, he came back not out of duty, but out of memory. After the nurse left the room, Sandra looked at him again. "Why did you not tell people about that moment?" she asked. "You could have used it in interviews. It would have made you look kind," Keanu smiled gently. The moment was not for cameras. It was real. And real things do not need attention. Sandra understood him more than anyone else could. They both had lived long enough to know that fame does not make people kind. Fame just shows who already was. She shifted her arm slowly, feeling a dull ache. "Did you know about the child?" she asked him. He nodded. "I did not know at first. But when the nurse told me what you had done, I knew I had to come here." "You should not have found out," Sandra whispered. "I wanted it to stay quiet." "It will stay quiet," Keanu replied. "I did not come here to tell the world. I came to remind you something you once reminded me." Sandra looked at him, waiting. "You said kindness is not a performance," Keanu continued. "You said it is a choice, and you were right." She blinked, holding back emotion not because it was weak, but because it was too deep. "Keanu," she said, "you did not owe me anything." "I know," he replied. That is why it mattered. Outside the hospital, the world continued to guess. Inside, something stronger than fame was happening, but the bigger truth was still hidden, waiting. Because Sandra did not just save a child, and Keanu did not just come to thank her, there was a connection between those two things. A connection, neither of them expected, and the real reveal was still ahead. Reveal that would change what people thought of both of them. Because the child Sandra saved was not random, and the person Sandra once comforted was not just a stranger. Life had already tied their stories together in ways no one knew yet. And soon, the reason Keanu came to the hospital would no longer be a mystery. The world would learn what Sandra never forgot, and what Keanu finally said. The days that followed were quiet on the outside, but full of unspoken weight inside the hospital room. Sandra was recovering, but the strength in her body was slower than the strength in her mind. She kept her pain hidden, the same way people hide scars that came from choices, not accidents. Every time the doctor walked in, he said the same thing gently. "You need rest, Miss Bullock. Your body gave more than it was ready to lose." She would nod, but she never complained. She never asked for a faster release. She never said, "I regret doing it," because she didn't. She knew the reason she was there, and it was worth every ache her body felt. Keanu stayed longer than anyone expected. He never treated the visit like a duty. He treated it like a second chance to stand for something that began long before either of them were famous. Sometimes he read quietly while she slept. Sometimes he just watched the window, as if he was thinking about how many lives cross without ever knowing they were connected. Sometimes they talked, but their conversations were never loud, never dramatic. They were full of things people say only when they already trust each other's silence. On the third afternoon, Sandra asked him a question that had been circling in her mind since he walked through the door. "Keanu, when did you find out it was me?" He looked at her with the same calm honesty he always carried. "2 days before you were admitted," he said. "Someone told me a woman had donated bone marrow to save a child. They said she never wanted her name mentioned, and when they described the donor, I knew." Sandra took a slow breath. "You still should not have come." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You are saying that to the wrong person. I would come every time if I had the chance." She looked away, and in that moment, her eyes softened in a way she could not stop. Because even though she was strong, even though she did not do this for thanks, a part of her still understood what it meant to be seen, not as a celebrity, not as a public story, but as a human being who tried to do something good in silence. Late that evening, the same nurse who cared for her entered the room again. She was carrying a file, but her expression was different this time. Not professional, not distant, but full of something personal. "Something emotional, Miss Bullock," she said softly. "May I tell you something?" Sandra nodded. The nurse placed her hand over her chest as if steadying her own heartbeat. "The little girl you saved? She is my daughter." The room fell into stillness. Sandra froze, not because she wanted praise, but because she had never expected to meet anyone connected to what she did. She had purposely chosen not to know the child, not to attach herself to the story, because true kindness is not something you collect back. "I did not want to say anything earlier," the nurse continued. "I wanted to respect your privacy, but when I saw Mr. Reeves here, I realized there is a larger truth between you two, and maybe it deserves to be spoken." Keanu did not move. His eyes lowered as if he already knew what was coming, or at least he hoped for it. The nurse continued in a slow voice. "The kind a mother uses when she is trying not to cry. Years ago, before my daughter was born, I worked at another hospital. There was a young man who used to sit outside the emergency room every night. He was waiting for news about someone very important to him. I remember him because he never asked for help. He never complained. He just sat quietly, like he carried the world alone." Keanu lifted his head. Sandra did the same. "That young man," the nurse said, "was you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu's eyes softened, not with shock, but with recognition. His voice barely left his throat. "You were the nurse who helped me that night?" She nodded, tears now visible, not dramatic, just real. "You didn't have money for food, so I gave you soup from the staff kitchen. You said thank you like it was the greatest gift anyone ever gave you. You stayed for 2 nights, and when you finally left, you told me, 'I hope I learn to give back the way you just did.'" Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. That memory had stayed with him his whole life. He just never knew the name behind it. The nurse then turned to Sandra. "And now, years later, you saved my child. The child of the nurse who once helped the young man you helped long ago." The silence after her words did not feel empty. It felt like a door had opened inside time. 3 lives. 3 acts of kindness, none planned, none rewarded, all connected, like invisible threads pulling years together. Sandra looked at Keanu. Keanu looked at her. Neither had words, because the truth had spoken itself. All the years they worked together, laughed together, shared film sets, supported each other. They never knew they had already met long before fame, through a chain of kindness none of them saw coming. The nurse said one final thing before she walked out. "What you both did not just save my daughter. It reminded me that the world is still held together by people who help without needing." Applause. And then she left, leaving, behind a silence that weighed more than any speech ever. Could Sandra leaned back slowly. "Keanu, do you understand what this means?" He nodded, eyes still fixed on the door where the nurse had exited. "It means kindness travels," he said quietly. "Even when no one sees it." Sandra looked at her arm, feeling the ache again, but now the pain had a story, not just a reason. "So the night I sat beside you," she whispered, "I wasn't just helping a stranger. I was helping the future life of the nurse who would one day raise the child I would save." Keanu smiled in a way only truth can bring. "And the night she gave me soup," he said, "she wasn't just helping a stranger. She was saving the life of the woman who would one day save her daughter." Their eyes met again. There was no acting here, no script, no cameras. Just 2 human beings realizing that life had already written, something stronger than any movie they ever filmed. But one thing still remained. Unsaid, something Keanu had been carrying with him since the moment he walked into the hospital. Something that Sandra needed to hear, because it was not thanks, not admiration, but something deeper. Something he had waited years to speak, and in the next part, he would finally say it. The words she never forgot. The 4th day in the hospital felt different from the others. The air itself carried a quiet awareness, like everyone inside that room finally understood they were living through a moment that would never be repeated again. The shock of the nurse's revelation still rested in Sandra's mind, like a warm echo. Not painful, but too powerful to ignore. Every person in that story had once stood alone, not knowing that kindness was already reaching toward them from the future. Sandra spent the morning staring at the ceiling, not out of boredom, but reflection. She had lived decades in Hollywood, met thousands of people, traveled the world, held awards, stood on stages, worked on sets filled with lights and applause. Yet nothing in her career felt as meaningful as the invisible. Threads that tied 3 simple acts of kindness together across time. 1 sandwich shared with a stranger. 1 bowl of soup offered in silence. 1 painful donation given without a name. None of them were posted, recorded, or praised. And yet, they became a loop of kindness that returned to each person at the perfect time. Not as reward, but as reminder. Keanu walked back into the room with 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside Sandra without speaking and sat down again, the same way he had every day since she was admitted. His presence was not loud, not emotional, not dramatic, but it was strong, like a promise made years ago that finally had a place to rest. Sandra lifted the cup slowly. "You know," she said, "when I walked into that hospital years ago, I had no idea who you were. I did not think you would remember me. I just wanted to sit with someone who looked like they were fighting a battle alone." Keanu nodded. "I did remember you, not because of your face, not because of your name." I remembered the feeling. People forget faces. They never forget how a moment made their heart feel. Sandra let out a slow breath. "And now all of this happened because of that moment," she said. "The nurse helping you, me helping you, me helping her daughter, and now you helping me." Keanu looked up with calm truth in his voice. "This is why we do not give up on kindness, and because it never really ends." There was a long pause after that, but it was not the kind of silence that tries to fill itself. It was the kind that teaches something without words. A few hours later, Sandra was strong enough to walk a little. The doctor allowed her to move around slowly, with help. So Keanu stood beside her, not holding her, not guiding her, but walking in step, just close enough to catch her if she lost balance, just distant enough to let her stay independent. When they reached the end of the hallway, Sandra stopped. She pressed her hand lightly against the wall, not for support, but because of what she felt. "You know what is strange," she whispered. "I have filmed so many emotional scenes in my life, so many stories written to make people feel something, and yet all of them feel small compared to what is happening here." Keanu looked at her with understanding. "Because movies create emotion. This is emotion that created a story?" She turned to him, eyes slow and steady. "I thought I was just helping a child," she said. "But it turns out I was also helping the child of the woman who once helped the man I once helped. And none of us knew we were all connected." Keanu nodded. "That is because real kindness never asks who it will reach. It just moves." Sandra smiled faintly. It was not the smile of relief. It was the smile of someone who had found a truth she had been living, but never fully understood. As they walked back to the room, a thought remained in Sandra's mind, a question she had been afraid to ask before. "Keanu," she said softly, "did you ever tell anyone about that night? About what I said to you?" He shook his head without hesitation. "I did not tell anyone because it was not a story to sell. It was a moment to carry. Some memories are not meant for interviews. They are meant to live inside us until they find their way back to the person who gave them." Sandra lowered her eyes. Something about his answer reached deeper than any thank you could. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Keanu remained standing, watching her with the quiet focus he had always carried, a focus built from listening more than speaking. "Keanu," she finally said, "when you walked into this room, I thought you came to check on me. But now I think you came here for something else." "I did," Keanu replied softly. She looked up. "What was it?" He sat down again and spoke with the kind of honesty that does not shake, does not rush, does not hide. "I came here because there is something you never heard that night, and I was not ready to say it until now." Sandra felt a weight in her chest, not fear, not sadness, anticipation. "What is it?" she asked. Keanu's eyes lowered, not in shame, but in memory. "The person I was waiting for that night," he said. "She did not make it." Sandra's breath paused. Keanu continued, voice soft but steady. "She passed a few hours after you left, and before she did, I told her something. I told her that a stranger sat beside me and made me believe I could still become someone who gives more than he loses. Sandra closed her eyes slowly, absorbing the truth she never knew she had been part of. And after that, Keanu added, I made a promise. I promised that if I ever found the chance to give someone the kind of strength you gave me that night, I would do it. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. The room fell quiet, not with sadness, with completion, with a circle finally closing. Sandra opened her eyes again, and there was something deeper in them. Not pain, not fear, not regret. Something like acceptance. So you came because you made a promise, she whispered. Keanu nodded. I came because you once gave me strength when I had none. And now it was my turn. Sandra stared at him, and a tear finally escaped her eye. Not because she was broken, but because some truths are too meaningful to stay inside the body. Keanu, she said slowly, I never knew what you carried that night. That is the thing about kindness, he replied. The person who gives it rarely knows how deep it goes. She looked away, pressing her hand to her chest, as if steadying the ache in her heart. What you just said, she whispered. That is something I will never forget. Keanu looked at her gently. I did not come here for you to remember me, he said. I came so you would remember yourself. Those were the words, the ones she never forgot, the ones that would echo in her life long after. The hospital doors opened again, but there was still more truth waiting, because the world still did not know where she was, and the world still did not know what she had done, and soon the silence outside the hospital would break, and the story no one expected would begin to spread, not because they wanted attention, but because kindness always finds its way into light, even when it begins in shadows. The 5th day arrived, and the hospital room no longer felt like a place of sickness. It felt like a place where something had finally healed that was never broken in the body, only hidden in the heart. Sandra was strong enough to leave, but she did not rush. There was no hurry. Some moments deserve to end slowly, so their meaning can settle in fully. The nurse came to remove the last monitor from Sandra's arm. She paused for a second, holding Sandra's hand the way a mother holds a moment she never wants to forget. My daughter is alive because of you, she said. But now I know something else. She is alive because of all three of us, because kindness moved from one person to another, even when none of us knew we were connected. Sandra smiled. But the smile carried weight, the kind that comes only when a person finally understands why life brought certain people together. Keanu stood near the window, watching the sky the way someone watches a memory dissolve into peace. He was not waiting for applause, not waiting for attention. He was ready to leave the same way he entered, quietly, respectfully, with purpose. Sandra turned to him. Keanu, she said softly, the world will never know this story the way we do. That is how it should be, he replied. Kindness is not smaller because it is unseen. It only becomes smaller when we try to own it. She nodded. Then she asked the final question, the one that had been waiting behind all others. What do I do now? Keanu looked at her with calm clarity. You do what you have always done, he said. You let the world see your strength, not because it makes you famous, but because it reminds others that strength can be gentle. She breathed in slowly, and for the first time since arriving, she felt complete. Not fixed, not saved. Just complete, as if every hidden part of her story had found its place. She walked to the door, ready to leave. Before she stepped out, Keanu spoke one more time. Not as an actor, not as a friend, but as someone whose life had been shaped by a single sentence years ago. You once told me that kindness does not need fame, he said. Today I want you to hear the rest of it. Kindness does not need fame, but the world needs kindness. That was it. Those were the words, the ones she never forgot. Sandra placed her hand over her heart and whispered, Thank you for coming back. Keanu smiled gently. You were never alone, he said. You just did not know who was walking with you. She walked out of the hospital not as a celebrity, not as a headline, but as a human being who had lived a full circle of kindness without ever planning it. And somewhere in the quiet, 3 lives stayed linked forever. A young man once waiting in grief, a woman offering strength to a stranger, a nurse offering soup without asking anything in return. A child living because kindness repeated itself. No cameras, no speeches, no spotlight, just proof that the smallest act of compassion can travel years, cross people, change destinies, and return when it is needed most. And that is why she never forgot what Keanu said. Because sometimes the most powerful words are not about love, not about fame, not about success, but about the one thing that makes every life matter. Kindness moves, even when no one sees it. Sandra left the hospital quietly, the same way she arrived. No cameras, no statements, no headlines. Yet something inside her had changed forever. She was not walking out as a patient. She was walking out as someone who finally understood the hidden shape of her own story. Keanu walked beside her until they reached the exit. They did not speak. They did not need to. Silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything already said, and everything that never needed to be said. When they reached the final door, Sandra stopped. "Keanu," she said softly, "one day people will ask why you visited me. They will try to create stories, to guess, to fill in blanks." "Let them," Keanu replied. "The truth does not get weaker when it stays private." She nodded. Because she knew something now. The world loves noise, but real humanity grows in quiet places. "Do you think the child will ever know?" she asked. "Maybe," Keanu said, "but she will not need to. The world she grows up in will already be better because kindness reached her before she even understood it." There was a pause. Not heavy, not sad, just final. "And you?" Keanu added, looking at her with the same calm certainty he always carried. "You gave someone life without asking for anything back. That is not kindness. That is grace." Sandra held his gaze, and for the first time since she entered that hospital, her eyes did not carry pain. They carried purpose. "And you kept a promise you made when no one was watching," she said. "That is not respect. That is loyalty." The doors opened. Sunlight touched her face. The world outside did not know what happened inside that room. But it did not need to, because the story was never meant to be a headline. It was meant to be a reminder that kindness is never wasted, that one act can cross years, that people you help in silence may one day return in silence, and that life is not built by big moments, but by quiet ones that go unnoticed until they return with meaning. Sandra stepped forward. Keanu stayed one step behind, as he always did, present but never demanding space. Before she walked away, he said the final words she would carry for the rest of her life. "The strongest people are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who fall, rise, and still choose to be kind." She did not answer with words. She answered with a small, grateful smile, the kind only two people can share when they have seen each other's truth. And then they walked into the world again. Not as actors, not as icons, but as two human beings forever connected by a circle of quiet kindness, a sandwich shared in the dark, a bowl of soup offered without reward, a life saved without a name, a promise kept without applause, and the world never knew. But the people who lived it never forgot.